Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today we're here with Ashley Davis, former White House staffer, partner at S3 Group, and also a new author. So can you tell us about your book real quick?
Sure. Yes. It's. I have to say, I've either worked for other people or am very comfortable talking about other people and things. But this is the first time that I've actually put myself out there and talking about myself. So it's called The Power Pivot, and as you said, and so I've been speaking about life pivoting, and not just life pivoting. It's actually broken down into three sections. It's life pivoting, or individual pivoting is what I'd like to call it, as well as a framework for business and a framework for leadership.
Sure.
And so I really wanted to make sure that I didn't isolate 50% of the country and write it that it was more skewed towards women or men. So it's actually for everybody. And I've been speaking about this topic for the last couple of years and decided that I had enough content that it could go in a book. And then I ended up, which I've never done before, because as everyone knows, as a staffer, you're never really supposed to talk about yourself again.
For sure.
But I did add in a lot of some personal stories and big life pivots that I did and how I did it.
Nice.
So it's
What was
fun.
the initial inspiration of like, okay, I want to go down this path of speaking about this topic and then turning it into a book? Where did that come from?
So I have a good problem, I consider. My mom actually thinks it's a bad problem, that I always get bored quickly. And so a few years ago, I'm like, I've got this lobbying thing covered. I've been doing it for a long time. I still do it, but I was like, I need to do something that makes me uncomfortable.
There you go.
I like to get up in the morning, have that little bit of nervousness in your stomach. And I actually started doing TV then. And I
Okay.
never did TV before 2.5 years ago. So I started doing TV, which then led through that. People would see me and say, hey, have you ever do speak? And they would hire me for political speeches.
Nice.
But my speakers bureau said, listen, that you're cutting off years at a time, because in an off year, no one really wants to hear about politics.
Yeah, for sure.
So I took about 6-7 months and developed a 45 to an hour speech about this. And it took a long time, and it actually popped in my head. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'm like, what can I talk about that really? And then it popped in my head that I really have all of these strategic plans, which is now a framework that I use to do certain things in my life. So I wanted to sit, a perfect example of this is I wanted to sit on corporate boards, and I was like, how's that going to happen? And so it took me 3 years from that first initial thought in my head to when I got on my first corporate board. But it consisted of going back to business school at 40 years old, and I didn't need, for those listening, you don't need to go to business school to sit on a board. But at that point, I wanted to make sure that I knew how to read a spreadsheet, but I needed a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so, and then I just started talking to various folks after. But it did take 3 years, but it was a plan. And so I talk about that in some of the instances, and just through other things, like as we can talk about in a little bit, I just merged my firm last year with S3,
for sure.
where I am now. And so that process took about 18 months of what I wanted to do. Did I want to merge? Did I want to sell? Did I want to, hire 5 new people? And, it's a process, and and I talk a lot about tiny pivots. So if you have a goal that you want to reach, but you are finding out like maybe this isn't going to work this way, it's being able to be agile and pivot a little bit to make sure that it's fitting where you want to go.
For sure. Which is hard as an entrepreneur, especially, or someone someone on the Hill too, who like has a policy idea that they want to bring to the finish line. You get this idea of how you want to get something done. And so often that prohibits you from seeing the little pivots along the way that allow you to actually get something from start to finish.
Right. And I say that, especially for people on the Hill that want to build, like, obviously most staff realize this now, but when you're first starting out, you think you can like do a lot, and sometimes you can get half of what you want in a bill or whatever it is, because you have to pivot or compromise, whatever you want to call it, but you still, half is better than nothing.
Maybe we should rebrand compromise as pivoting on the Hill, so that
That is
people are
true.
like, don't feel so bad about compromising. God forbid, right? So
Exactly,
it's
especially
pivoting
these
now.
days.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right, we like it. So you were a staffer. Kind of tell us just your career journey as we
Sure.
dive into things.
So I started my career in state government. I worked for Governor Tom Ridge, who was governor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And so I ended up interning for him my junior year in college in the summer. And then I was like, you know what? I like politics. Like, I wasn't a political science. Like, I didn't have that. I didn't think I liked politics. And I liked it. And I ended up graduating a semester early and went and started working for him right away.
Very cool.
And then transitioned to state lobbying. But then when President Bush was running for president, I went on the campaign in end of 99. And so 99, 2000, I just spent traveling to various states,
For sure.
learning that side of the business from ground zero. I think in New Hampshire I was knocking on doors, and so
Gotta do it.
Got to do it. And when it ended up going on a campaign and then Florida recount. Then and then transition, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going back to Harrisburg." Like, my goal was not, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to go work in the White House," but I was offered a job. I don't think I really thought about it, and then I was offered a job. My first job was Deputy Director of Management Administration, which is really the carrying and feeding of the White House. The military office reports up through that office, which is why I was in the White House on 9/11 and ended up staying there for a few weeks. And then when the president announced on October 8th that 2001 that there was going to be a White House Office of Homeland Security, and that would be equivalent to the National Security Council is pretty much how that was created. No one remembers. And so I was employee number one in that office, and Tom Ridge was employee number two.
That's cool.
And the only I like to
Beat your
say
boss.
that, but it's only because I was already approved in the White House
There you go.
process.
At least you can hold that on him.
Oh, totally. So I stayed there until we created the department, and then when he became secretary, I went to a law firm where I ran their. I went to work for his best friend, actually. I stayed there for 13 years, ran their government affairs part of the firm, and then 10 years ago, myself and three others, we started Westfront Strategies, which was a boutique lobbying firm. It was great. We had a great run, but really did get to that pivotal point where we needed to. You always need fresh blood. You always need new people. Like, look what's going to happen in this election, and how many new people are going to be on the Hill after this election.
For sure.
Just because of how many retirees
and the
redistricting
turnover,
and everything else.
Turnover on the Hill is just insane these days too. So as soon as you get comfortable with the people like they're out the door.
They're out the door. Yeah. Yes. And so and that's when I went through like the 18-month process and ended up at S3, which has been great. My team has fit 100% in with them.
That's great.
And I was friends with their two founding partners for a long time.
So what does a partner do?
Well, a partner is not any fancier than anybody else, except we have to bring in. Have to bring in the business.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've been doing this a long time. My day to day has changed a lot. I do more strategic stuff now than maybe going to the Hill every day.
Nice.
Because I'm like 51. So everyone on the Hill probably thinks I'm like super old.
No, I think you got the nice style. You stand out just like that, so it works.
Thank you.
For staffers who are thinking like, okay, I want to go into lobbying one day, obviously they understand it from the perspective of someone comes into their office, they lobby on behalf of an issue, but I think a lot of staffers don't realize the business development side of being a lobbyist. So can you help the future lobbyists that are on the Hill or in the administration right now understand what it takes to be, like, what a lobbyist is like behind the scenes?
Sure. And my number one, I'm going to look at the camera and say this, because my number one piece of advice that I always give is return downtown's emails. Because everyone remembers it. And so there is going to be a time, and I'm sure all the lobbyists, all of us are super annoying, but everyone remembers when you're that staffer that you can never hear from.
Yeah.
And you're not going to stay on the Hill forever, so you're going to need downtown and to find your next job, most likely, if you stay in the area. And it's going to be much harder if you weren't very good returning emails. And it's going to be even harder if for business development, going back to your point, of companies remember when you didn't respond to their emails or phone calls or whatever it is. So I always, because believe me, and I'll just talk about this real quick. When we started the White House Office of Homeland Security, you can imagine every company in the world wanted to sell us a widget. And I remember I would return phone calls at like 5 a.m. just to make sure I returned the phone call. No one was usually there, but I still returned it.
For sure.
But anyway, so that's very important. But I also think that it's very, very hard to bring in clients. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. The people I've hired over the years, I have the best story. I hired someone when I was at the law firm who's still with me. We still work together. We're partners now. He worked for McConnell, and he was head of public sector outreach. So his job was to talk to downtown.
Gotcha.
That was his last job. And so when he was leaving, he was thinking, well, all these people that have called me for the last 15 years, of course are going to hire me when I get off the Hill, right? And I said to him, take your time. It takes 12 to 18 months to bring in your first client. Just because you leave in June doesn't mean that companies' budgets are in cycle to hire you, or do they have to fire another person to hire you? So it takes, and I think he got his first client at 14 months.
There you go.
And
Not bad.
so, but listen, some people, depending on where you're working, some people can get something very quick. But I would say, just traditionally, it takes a long time, and it's a lot of work. And obviously, people can go in house, and you're not responsible for that. But for firms, and I think it's a big question that you should ask when you're interviewing is, obviously you're going to know if business development is a part of your salary, but also, is it expected?
For sure.
Because it's not as easy as you think.
For sure, especially if you're coming from a government background, it's just not ingrained in you, this idea of bringing in revenue or kind of paying for yourself. And so when it comes to having to go out and sell, you're not accustomed to the business cycle of this takes a really long time for things to move, because on the Hill you're moving so quickly on everything that you're working on that you expect the rest of the world is also moving at that pace. And so I had applied when I started the business here too, okay, startup, we're moving quick, we're breaking things. And then it comes to the selling side of it, and when you work with these bigger corporations, it takes months and months and months, if not 12 months to 18 months. And
to
so
sign someone.
For a sponsorship or anything like that. And so
how long did it take you for your first sponsor?
So we made a very, very minimal amount of money in the first year. I was waiting tables at Mission Navy Yard, and so they were nice enough to make a very small sponsorship early on. But the first bigger sponsorship came probably a year in, maybe 9-10 months. And it was just one of those cold emails that I had sent 6-8 months earlier, and we talked immediately, and then I didn't hear anything from them for so long, and I forgot about it. And then all of a sudden they reach out hey, we're ready to spend at the beginning of the next year. And so
because they had their fiscal year ready, and made money. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Just because you were ready,
exactly,
doesn't mean they are. And corporations have to run they usually spend their budgets within. Well, you run a business now, so you know how budgets work.
For sure. And even on the startup side of things, you don't have the luxury of thinking 1 to 2 years out, but these bigger companies, they've already got their money spent before the year even starts. And so for the most part, they know where it's going. So,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm still learning those aspects.
Well, is it easier to get sponsors now?
We're getting there. I think it's we're 4 years in and we're still kind of the new kids on the block, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone knows Punchbowl or Playbook, and they have like the traditional policy newsletters, but we're kind of in this space where we focus on staffer lifestyle and, events, jobs, everything pertaining to a congressional staffer. And so we're in this like new niche sector, and we have to kind of explain ourselves a lot. So
Do you have, sorry, I'm asking you questions now, but do you have how do you get your information?
As far as like events and jobs and all that, a lot of sourcing. We have like, he's not in here right now, but we have a computer science whiz who's basically wrote programs to read all the different job sites and event sites.
Okay.
So we collect a lot of that, and then people send it in as well. So it's a lot of different managing aspects of getting the information out there.
And with AI now, it's probably getting a little bit easier.
Oh, I know. Like when I think back now and look at the founding part of it, and the first thing we built was an app. Today, Claude Code could have built that app for a few $100s. We spent way beyond that to get it off the ground. And so sometimes
in a lot shorter time.
Yeah. And I kick myself on that. But at the end of the day, it's like, I really felt like God called me to start the business at that moment. We launched the week after COVID restrictions ended in DC.
Wow.
And so like as a community, like staff or business, when no one else was having events, when no one else, everyone was kind of recovering from COVID, we were ready to just hit the ground running. So
that's actually a really good time because people were so tired of being.
They were thirsty to get out and do anything.
Yes.
So we were
yes.
ready to do it.
Really hard time
Thank God
for
that's
me.
over.
Yes. I'm like, can you even believe we all like did all that? I mean, it's like, it's kind of like a distant memory right now.
Yeah, and it didn't take that long. It took like 2 years before it was just completely out of our minds.
Exactly.
And I think we needed to all just forget it. It's like, hopefully people have learned to wash their hands a little bit better in that time, but other than that, I hope it just fades away.
Did you build a company then in COVID?
Yeah. So I was working on the Hill and just did it nights and weekends. It took about a year, and then quit my job when it launched and started waiting tables at night and did that during the day.
I love the story. That's great.
Worked out. It
that
was
was
a grind.
the grit part of the book, right?
Yep, for sure. So I definitely sympathize a lot with the things that you talk about. So we were very glad to have you on for this.
Thank you.
So you talk about kind of your first power pivot being on 9/11. So can you tell us that story a little bit more?
Sure. It was, again, I didn't talk about this for a number of years, actually, until a few years ago, and it's going to be the 25th anniversary this year, which is amazing. It's amazing. It's gone by that quick. But so my office was in the West Wing basement at the time, so it was near the Situation Room. And the president's dad, so President Bush 41, was actually in my office saying hi. My boss used to work for him.
Gotcha.
So he came in and to say hello, and that's when the second plane hit.
Jeez.
And so the Secret Service whisked him away, and they were telling all of us to, I don't know if you've heard this, but they told us to take off our shoes and run, and that really did happen. It was always reported, but I was walking out, and my boss said to me, I can't tell you what's going to happen, if we're going to live or die, but there's a couple of us that need to stay back to make sure, because no one had Blackberries. Like, no one had a way to communicate. The only thing that worked were these Nextel walkie-talkies.
Oh, those were the days.
that GSA had. But staff didn't have them. But we had to talk between the bunker and the sit room. And I just didn't want to, I was like, I made my first physical pivot, I guess, and turned around and walked back in, which really, a lot of things that, you forget for a long time and then remember that happened. I actually, the president, when he was finally allowed to come home, I went out and greeted him when he came off Marine One because there was no one, there was like 5 people. And I had the dog, and Marine One, I don't know if you've ever been, but how it works is there's 3, helicopters, and then the one that is with him, you don't know until the last minute. But this was huge helicopters. They weren't the normal Marine One. They were like battlefield helicopters. I'm sure they have an official name, but I don't know. And maybe it was a Black Hawk, I guess. But so he came in, they were flying really low, and he got off and saluted the Marine and looked at me and said, "We're at war." And like even at that time of that day, because I think he addressed the nation, say around 9 o'clock. I don't really remember, but this was probably 8 or 7:30, and I still hadn't heard of Al Qaeda. Like I didn't know who he was talking about that we were at war with, right? And I didn't have any national security background at that time or anything like that. So just things like that just were really historic moments. And everyone told me, like, write it down. And for all your listeners, I wish I would have written it down because I don't remember everything.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, which this drives me crazy. My son's school does not teach about 9/11. Most schools in the city don't teach about 9/11. And I'm like, really? Just because it's actually so recent compared to every other war.
I guess so.
So I talk about that experience in the book a little bit. There's obviously a lot still classified that I can't, but staffers on the Hill, you know this. You don't realize that you're experiencing really cool things or really historic things. I mean, I was at the dinner on Saturday with the shooting, and like once again, I was like, wow. Like I'm sitting there. I was at Kash Patel's table, and he had us made sure that we all were under the table, and I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, that experience. Like I just need to. There's just all those types of things that I'm not saying we experienced that on the Hill, but just things in our lives, being able to be exposed to what we're exposed to in Washington. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, January 6th was one of those for me when I was working on the Hill, and then I was doing the inauguration 2 weeks later. And the leading up of like our practices for the inauguration, where we'd go stand out there were bomb threats, there was like smoke in the sky, and so everyone would evacuate. Those evacuation moments are the ones that really like stick in your head. Of, like,
so I like completely forgot about that. Because obviously January 6th happened, but then Biden had his inaugural. 2 weeks later. Yes, I wasn't. So I'm sure that security was like
they were so
insane.
And the whole complex was shut down. It looked like a war zone, and so it was so hard to get in. But then everyone was just on high alert of like it was just some like car fire in Navy Yard, but they saw smoke and everyone's like, oh no, what's going on? And so there's these pictures of us having to like run into the Capitol, and then the National Guard that was stationed
so funny
inside.
You run into the Capitol.
Yeah, right. And the National Guard was like assembling inside and like getting ready to go outside, and then they found out it was a false alarm. It was weird.
Yes.
But yeah, those are the moments. I think it's probably the adrenaline that just like freezes that in your mind.
It does, and also I would think that the emotions of that time period were really high as it was. I mean, what people experienced in the Capitol that were in the Capitol on January 6th too. And so I'm sure that was,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I can't hold, like, I was in Cannon. You know, we got evacuated, not a big deal. The people who were actually in the Capitol, very different experience, much scarier.
Yes, yes. And obviously, like, it was just crazy.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you have that experience. I feel like those are the moments where the easy thing and what everyone else is doing is to run away, right? And probably the smart thing to do,
Probably.
you know? But like, there are those people that kind of take that opportunity to think like, wait, what's the best way? Is there a way for me to be a part of this and help out? And so I think that goes to the broader idea of how you can achieve and grow in DC is to kind of go against the status quo and think about how you can fit into those moments.
Well, or really taking advantage of experiences that are offered to you. Yeah. I don't think that I had any thought in my mind that staying that day was going to get me to what it ended up getting me to, because it was so. We had no idea what was going on, but I did, when I was offered the chance to stay, I did think, okay, I would much rather be in here than out there where people, remember everyone was, well, you probably weren't here then.
I was 5, yeah.
Okay, see, you make me feel old.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Oh my gosh. But everyone was just walking
Yeah.
across bridges because nothing was working. and no phones were working.
So weird.
So it was, but going back to your point to that is it really is about taking advantage of when your boss says, hey, do you want to do this? And you really don't want to because you want to go home or you want to go to a party or you want to do whatever, but actually doing it because who knows what can happen.
I feel like that's the hardest part about DC, right? And that's how they get you. You end up staying late at work every night because this might be the moment.
Exactly, exactly.
So that's a hard one.
Well, it was so funny. I was on Saturday. I just have had a really busy week last week, and Saturday I was like dreading getting dressed and going to the black tie, and I'm like trying to think of, and I knew the president was going to talk long, and I'm like, I'm not going to get home till late. And I was like, how am I going to do this? And then, ironically, just as you said, you show up and then something that made history happen.
Yeah.
I thought making history was he and the press like throwing things at each other or something.
Yeah, who would have known? That could have been hostile in many different ways, right?
Exactly. But that was not that. I wasn't expecting this way.
Yeah. So apparently they're going to reschedule. So.
I don't know how that works. So I've been saying over the last couple of days, just on media, that I don't think I don't know how they could do it back there ever again.
Yeah, for real.
Just because of that hotel is never going to be able to be completely shut.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be worth it financially.
Which I know Trump came out pretty much right away and was like, this is why we need the ballroom. And it's opportunistic for sure. But it's like, yeah, why was this at a hotel for so long? And that's also where Reagan was shot,
Well, I know
too.
it's kind of like, why are we, like, third time is not going to be a charm.
Yeah.
So, like, we should not expose them. But first of all, I also think that correspondence weekends on people's schedules for a year.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
how do you schedule it and people can actually show up and there's not going to be the parties? I mean, who knows what they'll do? We'll see. But, going to the ballroom, it's interesting just spending so much time in the White House when I was working there. And obviously, a lot of people just don't want the ballroom because he's talking about it.
For sure.
But it does make sense. Like from if this was Obama that's
Watch
doing
out,
it.
you got a hot take coming in.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it is.
It makes sense.
It does make sense from a security perspective.
For sure.
Like I'm thinking tonight, Wednesday night, excuse me, with the King in town.
Oh yeah.
And they're doing it, I think, on the yard, but with drones and stuff now. Like, how do you make sure that that's all? And that's kind of the point.
Yeah, it's so hard to stay up on all the security threats that are possible these days, right? Seemed like a simpler time back in 2001 when you had to deal with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know how you deal with it. God bless Secret Service. Like, that's a hard job.
Well, you look at, I've been thinking, you watch what's happened in Iran in regards to how the war's being fought. I mean, it's being fought with drones.
With DJI drones.
Exactly.
Or DJI drones.
The
like
cheap ones.
Yeah, the cheap ones.
That our warfare has changed dramatically, and I don't know if we were ready for that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know we're trying to play catch up now, but and it's been said a lot: criticize, not criticize, whatever. But you don't need a big missile when if they're fighting this with little drones.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like the amount, the cost per like attack for Iran versus the U.S. is just astronomical.
Well, and Ukraine was the reason how this has become so mainstream.
Yeah, and just like the whole. I know we're getting off topic here, but it's
sorry.
like
I
it's
love
so
defense,
fascinating. Of like, I feel like the Russian invasion was really the first time that we saw on a mass scale like people filming war with their phones too, and you could just open Twitter and see this kind of stuff. And so the access to it, the change in warfare is just fascinating and scary at the same time.
Exactly.
All right, so tell us a little bit more of your career in the White House. So you become employee number 1 at DHS, or the Office of
Homeland Security,
okay,
OHS, cool. It was at the time.
Right,
yes.
okay. So tell us a little bit more about that experience as you grew with that.
So 8 of us started that office, and none of us knew anything about Homeland Security, including the governor. And it was the day that anthrax hit, the first day of and the day we declared war on Afghanistan. And we were growing something that we didn't know. And Tom Ridge was such a presence but he wasn't an expert on anthrax. And one thing having that office, is you don't have a budget. So everyone that worked for us, besides the 8 that started, where we're actually White House staff, everyone else was a detailee.
Okay.
And the funniest thing is Rumsfeld never wanted to give us anybody from DOD because we were at war.
Yeah.
But like a lot of DOD folks wanted to come and do this mission.
Yeah.
But we built a team that ended up getting to 120.
Wow.
And then we worked in secret for a long time with, Lieberman and Senator Lieberman and Jane Harman were the Democrats that were really leading the effort on this with the Republicans on creating the department and giving it a budget, and really what it is become today. Now, I think we all can agree that maybe it's put ICE aside, but I mean, just the bureaucracy of the huge agency is just huge. But it does make sense in regards to the mission of sharing intelligence and working together, because we had like INS, which is now ICE, that was like at Treasury, I think, and then you had Secret Service that was at Treasury. You'd all these different things. So bringing them under one roof it was something that was important. But listen, we worked 7 days a week. We didn't have, you couldn't work from home, obviously. Everything we did was classified, sensitive, whatever. And also, so we had to do a lot with the sit room. And so I had to be at the office every day at 5:15 a.m. Not on weekends, but during the weekday, 5:15, because we started our security briefing, our CIA briefing at 6:15, and then the governor briefed the president at 7. Yeah. He was an early bird, President Bush. So, and then you didn't get home till 10, 11 at night, depending on the day. So it was long, and that's why I didn't go to the department.
Yeah,
also,
that's fair.
I was Tom's special assistant, and so he and I were in the West Wing, and everybody else was over in the other buildings, but because it was only he and I, like 7 days a week forever, he depended on me, his family depended, it was so encompassing that I felt that it was just time.
And the longer you go, the more encompassing it becomes.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And I felt that I needed to leave to grow. Yeah. Because Tom was like, you can do anything that you want, in the new department. And I'm like, but yeah, you're still calling me if X, Y, and Z happens, because I know.
In today's world, hey, my Netflix isn't working.
Yeah, exactly, whatever it is. So it was time for me to go, but I did it right and went and worked with his best friend,
That's great.
And really enjoyed that. But yeah, it was time.
Yeah, okay, before we get into the next chapter, help us understand what the Bush White House was like. There's so few people that get the honor of working in the West Wing, right? Mm-hmm. And it's different for every administration. Some things remain the same, but what was that world like for you?
Well, if anyone's watched The West Wing, it's nothing like that, because there's no windows. So my office was between the Roosevelt room, so it went the Oval, Roosevelt room, my office, and then VP's office. So I saw them every day. Yeah. I became a huge fan of Dick Cheney because he was almost like a grandfather in regards to. I still read The Economist to this day, because he said the way to get to know what's going on in the world the best every week is to read it. And so, just things like that I'll never forget that. And I didn't do it because he was the vice president. He just became like that figure in my life. Cool. But the Bush White House was very buttoned up. I would say in the most like it was probably Obama.
Gotcha.
The White House controlled everything. Which I feel is how it should be. Because I used to say this all the time in Trump's first term, when he didn't know what it was to obviously how to run he didn't have very many people that knew. You can't give your cabinet secretary, the cabinet secretaries work for you. Yeah. And then all the staff work for you, and it's your name at the top. So I don't even know if you remember that he gave a lot of latitude towards.
For sure.
I just remember Rex Tillerson was able to hire who he wanted.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not going to work out well because it's just going to. And so you see it this term
sure.
that it's more centralized in the White House and presidential personnel, like just meaning hiring. But the Bush, it was a lot of the people worked for the dad.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a whole new group of Bush people, but then there was the whole other group of Bush 41 people.
Does that create kind of a hierarchy, or this is how we did it before type of behavior?
Well, I thought, so Andy Card, who was the chief of staff when I was there, was a fantastic leader. He was catty-cornered for me. He was he was part of the dad's world originally, became part of his. But then you had like Karl Rove and Karen Hughes that were part of the new world.
And they had a lot of power.
But you know how it worked was because the president made it work. So he said, even after Carl and Karen and everybody else were around him for years, and then on the campaign, once Andy was put in place as chief of staff, no one talked to him without telling Andy first.
Gotcha.
And the president did that. And he said, have you told Andy? Is Andy coming? So if Carl tried to get a meeting with the president.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that's why it worked. That's why it was so buttoned up. I mean, it was very buttoned up. And we came in after Clinton, which was very loose in regards to the manager. I'd probably say it's more like how, like he liked to talk and get a lot of opinions from people. So does this president.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
So, and our big thing, I remember, you'll crack up about this. I'm pointing to some lady that's working here. At one point, when I was first starting to work in the West Wing, they were like thinking of having us wear pantyhose, and I'm like, I'm not wearing pantyhose. But they realized, okay, that kind of I mean, that never happened. But my point is, like, you did not go in the Oval without a suit and tie.
Gotcha.
And it was just very conservative in that way. Yeah.
So help us understand the difference in personality between the vice president and the president. Of at least from the outside, it seems like Cheney was a very kind of like quiet, contemplative guy, whereas Bush is the more like friendly and not lackadaisical in a bad way, but just kind of easygoing.
Yeah, he's very easygoing, very gregarious. He had his dog a lot, and like, especially after 9/11, when they would go to the sit room for their briefings every morning, he'd bring the dog past. And I always like to say this to people as well about him is Tom Ridge said he was the hardest person he's ever had to brief because first of all, they were friends beforehand, and so it's weird that you're working, but you respect the office.
For sure.
And then you're a governor, and then you're used to being briefed. But he said that George Bush would ask the question no one thought of asking, and so you were never really prepared for, you had to prepare in every way.
Yeah.
And Cheney was more of a traditional. You kind of knew how he was going to think. But yes, he was very quiet, but Cheney respected the president and the presidency. Like he knew that he was the commander, like who the commander-in-chief was.
So how was the vibe in the White House post 9/11? What in the immediate aftermath of like work culture, and obviously you're working a lot in that process, and how did it grow over time?
Well, there was a lot of, so for us in the West Wing, and I was still in management administration right after, and what really happens, we had to go through at that point and move a lot of people to different buildings. We did a different office on 17th and G because they had to do more, they had to pretty much do the executive office the EEOB because the Eisenhower Executive Office Building because of like bomb-proof windows.
Gotcha.
So they had to add another layer of security everywhere, so that's what we were working on that day. A lot of people, obviously in the national security space, were working on what we were going to do to retaliate. But there was just a lot of anxiety, but just people had their heads down and were working, but no one knew. Like most of us just still didn't know really what it meant.
When you think of from a leadership perspective, who was someone that stood out to you during that time of kind of quieting that anxiety and trying to bring like determination to where we're going on this issue?
Definitely the president. He was very good. One of the things that I always like to tell people as well was he made sure that we all had access to the Quran, and I want to say Quran for Dummies. It wasn't like everyone was reading
Gotcha.
the whole Bible. Or Quran, it's not a Bible, because he wanted to make sure that we all knew that this was not the Muslim religion that was attacked. Like, this wasn't said in the Muslim religion, but this was an attack on the Muslim religion.
For sure.
So I thought as a leader, that was such an amazing thing to do, because, you know, a lot of the country was reacting to people from certain parts of the world or whatever. And he wanted to make sure that we would never do that.
That's interesting.
And so I thought that was very good. But also Andy Card was a very good leader. So they calmed everybody down. But I think, look, when the president wanted to throw the first pitch out at the World Series game, or
one of the highlight moments. I was like 5 years old. I'll never forget it.
Really?
Just so cool.
Why? Because he got it over the plate.
Oh yeah, definitely got to respect on that. As a big baseball guy, like huge respect to there. But even just going back in years past and watching, it's just such an emotional moment that just lives on.
The best, well, obviously when he was on the rubble, talking to the first responders, that was very inspirational as well. But no, listen, there's a lot of debate over Iraq, over Afghanistan, whether you agree. Obviously there were mistakes, but what I love about him is who he feels that he answers to is his higher being.
Mm-hmm.
Every decision he makes is based on that.
Gotcha, that accountability.
That accountability. When you have faith like that, so him putting young people in harm's way by going to war weighed on him, every president.
For sure.
Very heavily. And to this day, and he's kept us quiet, any military family that lost somebody in Iraq or Afghanistan, he meets with. Not in front of the media, not in front of anybody. Some wouldn't meet with him over time, but he always invited them to either when he was traveling, go to their house or invite them to the White House. And he just, again, I think when you have that when you're centered like that to something, I think it's just really important.
For sure, and I think in a lot of places in DC, power can make you feel like you're invincible and that you don't have accountability to anyone. And I think we see that a lot with stuff like the Epstein files, is there's just not this like accountability at the time being, or even now afterwards. And so we need more people that are like that have a higher like accountability structure, and that's super important in decision making. And so we want to wrap up soon, so I want to make sure we talk about your book a little bit more. And so just help us explain each side of the pivots in life, right? So the personal and professional, what are some good examples of what those could be?
So my most fun that I talk about in the business part of the book is about being able to adapt. So if things aren't going the right way as an entrepreneur, like you were saying, being able to do your little pivot to make sure that it's right. And my favorite story is, because I was shocked when I learned this, is YouTube was a dating site when it started.
That's crazy.
And so the founders said, we're going to start this site. You're going to put a video up hoping to get a date. And what they realized was that people were putting up videos, but no one was dating each other. But people were watching each other's videos.
For sure.
And the founders were able to make, I think over an 18-month period, really change the dating site. And I think it was called Hookup or something, hookup.com or something, to what it is now. And, I mean, which is one of the biggest platforms.
Yeah.
I'd say
it's up there.
Exactly. And it was because of, so I kind of feel that's two things. It's the business being able to pivot, but also the leadership being able to lead the company. It was a small startup at the time, but still. And then the other thing that I've been talking a ton about now, and also advising a lot of people on, is kind of with AI, whatever
sure.
we were just talking about. The person that developed your app is probably not in business anymore.
Yeah, or they've had to significantly change how they run their business.
Correct, or that they pivot to whatever the to fit into this new world. Or you even look at, obviously this is a sad example because people are losing their jobs, but the 10,000 layoffs with Meta, but they have to, because what they're doing is not going to be the same as it's going to be in 2 years from now. So if you don't do it, and you're responsible to your shareholders at the end of the day too, if you're not making changes in this new world, it's not going to change.
Yeah, that's what's hard, especially as a publicly traded company. Like, you have to act in that way. It's your fiduciary duty, right? And I think that can be a problem sometimes. But in this case, yeah, I mean, even at our small little company, you have to adapt so much. And like, I spent my morning trying to figure out all the things I can do with Claude Cowork to take stuff off my plate. And it's like, this is not stuff that I'm replacing anybody with. It's stuff that was wasting my time.
Yes.
And now I'm able to, you have to put up in like a lot of upfront investment, which is so hard to like understand this stuff and implement, but it's so worth it long term.
I actually think who's going to benefit from this the most. So my son's 17. And so I would say high school is when, really just the last 2 years, it's really starting to, he can identify like that, what's written by AI.
Interesting.
But what he's going to know, and better than, because everything he develops now, all of his past and present is going to be with AI.
For sure.
And so I just think that it'll be interesting to see what jobs will come out of it, because there's going to be different jobs. I mean, if you even look right now, I'm working on this project I sit on Kevin O'Leary's investment board, and we're working this project on a couple data centers, and we're not taking energy off the grid, but it's all new energy. My point is, though, is the workers that we need are trade workers, not. So it's trade schools, I think, are going to come and be really important again.
It's having its reckoning, right? Like, I feel like it hasn't got enough credit for so long, and we're finally allowing it to be okay to go to trade schools.
Totally,
right?
and you're probably going to make more. You can make more money.
Yeah, right off the bat, especially. Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I'm at a point where it's like, if I can find an intern or a full-time person who knows these AI agents so well that they can figure out ways to look at our business and implement right away, like, you have a job like that too. And so people who can figure out how to take advantage and understand these platforms, you're going to be so valuable in this world.
Absolutely.
All right, so tell me about some few other pivots before we go.
Okay, so you remember, Jack Dorsey, who started Twitter.
For sure.
He has a new company now. He's doing the same thing with changing his whole business model around AI. That's another AI example. Yeah. But also, there's one when PepsiCo CEO put in a 3-year plan because she saw that people were moving away. There was a time period about 5 years, probably 10 years ago now, that people were taxing sugar. And like New York City was, and I think Philly was. Yeah. And so she put in place a 3-year pivot that would change to make sure that they're just not relying on soda and pop and things like that, but that's when they brought in some healthier things. So, I mean, I can say it in many different areas, but I think that it's the way of the future, though, to be able to be nimble like this.
I think the other side of it, too, that came to mind when I was thinking about this topic was humility, right? Because it's really hard to pivot and change way if you're so caught up in what you believe and that your vision is the best for it. And I get caught up in this all the time, so I'm part of it. But like, that idea of like submitting to the situation and taking a more strategic, like, upstairs look at like what's going on, and allowing things to change is a very difficult thing to do overall, to humble yourself.
Well, and resilience. I mean, I talk about resilience a lot, of not giving up. For example, at one point, I thought I wanted to like do corporate lobbying, like in the last 10 years, I would say. And I started down, I did my little thing of how I was going to do it. And I started talking to people, and I realized after probably a year and a half, I didn't like actively put myself out there, but I did enough that I would be like, oh, I'd be interested in something like that at some point. And I realized very quickly, for me, spending my entire private sector career in consulting world, that a lot of corporations of where I would have wanted to go wanted people that understood corporate America.
For sure.
And so after about 18 months, whenever I kept hearing like, but you don't know how to live in corporate world, which is really true, and I'm glad it didn't work
all
out.
Government people.
But it was something, I would say that was my, everyone always asks like, what's the pivot that didn't work? And that was when I tried to make work that didn't work.
I feel in my mind, the way Israel has like mandatory military service, I'm like, we need to have mandatory private sector service so that our government staffers understand how that world works so we can better regulate.
Exactly.
I find it very interesting.
That is very true. That is very true.
So
but this was super fun.
Yeah. Where can people get your book?
And Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, anywhere. Books A Million. So, yeah. And it's very readable. It's not like 400 pages or anything.
We love that. Thank you. Thank you for everyone.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's very fun.
Of course. Thank you for tuning into Capital Spotlight Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe to our channels to stay updated on new releases, share the show with your friends, and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more from Connect, subscribe to our daily newsletters, follow us on social media, and check out our website, all at Capital Connect, capital with an O, CNCT. See you next time.